The first sound wasn't a bark. It was a chain whispering across frozen dirt, a metallic prayer repeated so often it forgot what it was asking for. Breath turned into chalk in my throat as I stepped past the leaning fence and found the bowl of ice by the rotting steps, a ring of rust blooming where a tongue had once tried to drink winter. Somewhere ahead, the chain whispered again, and the darkness inside the collapsed doghouse shifted. A nose answered first, dry, cracked, pale like paper, and then a pair of eyes that were ancient with effort. I told myself to keep my voice steady. I told myself not to show the anger that kept biting the inside of my cheek. Even the wind seemed to tiptoe. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, and the night held its breath. The figure inside the doghouse uncurled in degrees, ribs counting themselves under matted fur, one paw lifting and then changing its mind. On the porch, a light flicked on. A voice called something I couldn't afford to hear. The chain tightened when she tried to stand. It had been cut short enough to teach surrender. In that moment, the yard became a courtroom, the air a verdict, and every step I took toward her felt both too slow and already too late. I learned a long time ago that cruelty rarely begins as a roar. It starts as a shrug, a small forfeiture repeated until it becomes the weather. The house was the kind that had learned to live with its own collapse, siding peeled, a tire half, buried like a fossil, windows that saw nothing and were tired of the effort. A plastic kiddie pool lay upside down against the fence, catching leaves it could not play with. Under the house's missing eave, melted icicles had left tear tracks. We had come earlier for a welfare check, the neighbor's tip brittle with accumulated worry. "Been hearing her for months," she had said. Not barking. The other sound. She had made a motion with her hand, like someone pulling a chain through their own heart. Paperwork propped the law against the door. Uniformed patients absorbed a wave of negligence shaped like a man. "She's fine," he lied. "She's got food." He kicked the bowl of ice with a boot that had forgotten how to be useful. When he turned his back, his cruelty made a sound. Soft, practiced, as if setting something down. That sound followed me across the yard. I knelt because that is how trust begins, with someone choosing not to tower. The chain sang again as she tried to come forward. It was looped twice around the cinderblock stake, as if someone had worried it might learn to forgive. The metal had polished itself against her neck into an ugly halo. I put my hands where she could read them. Her ears folded so far back it looked like the world had stolen all her yeses. It is a skill you build, reading the tremor in a shoulder, the percentage of pupil versus brown, the way fear makes mathematics out of simple movements. The officer behind me kept his voice low as he read the code sections to a man who did not know the numbers and did not want to. I did not look at them. My universe had narrowed down to a cold breath on my knuckles, a tiny lick that was more apology than taste, the chain pressing into my wrist like punctuation. Bolt cutters make a sound that always feels bigger than the metal. They argued with the stubborn link bit in, and the yard declared a new paragraph when the chain gave. She flinched when pressure left her neck because, like all long sentences, you learn to live with the weight of grammar and miss it when it's gone. I slid the loop of a soft lead over her head and felt her freeze, the way bodies rehearse even after the music stops. "It's a different kind," I said to her, as if that would translate. The porch light carved shadows into the yard, making good and bad look close enough to confuse even the moon. The officer marched words into a form that could be signed. A neighbor's blinds quivered with the sympathy of the anonymous. Somewhere a truck downshifted slowly, like a man reconsidering his life. She collapsed when I tried to lead her toward the gate. Not dramatically. Bodies after long confinement often choose to be small, as if reducing surface area might reduce danger. She folded like a map, and I had to remember the patience of Thor. Kneeling again, I let the lead go slack and opened my hands. She climbed into them with her face first, the rest of her cautious, as if she decided that while bodies could lie, faces sometimes told the truth. Her breath smelled like pennies and old prayers. The fur around her neck, matted where rain had tried to baptize what the chain refused to release, was almost rope now. When I lifted, she did not resist, a mercy and a heartbreak. She was lighter than she looked. Neglect always steals first from the place's vanity guard's cheeks, hips pride. The car heater had the generosity of a small sun. In that cheap, holy light, she made a sound I will not let words degrade, a sigh that was not relief so much as the beginning of it. On the ride to the emergency clinic, she kept her eyes on the window as if the world needed supervision. Her paws flexed when we hit potholes, practicing leaving even when still. The clinic lobby smelled like bleach, trying to atone for everything it had witnessed. Under fluorescent honesty, her reality became a list: pressure sores, frost nip, parasites making empires in a body that had been forced to rent itself out, a nail curling into a pad from months of not going anywhere. The tech's hands were soft with competence. "We'll shave the neck last," she said, almost like a promise, because even help can hurt when it presses the place where hurt learned to live. I named her only in my head at first. Names are promises, and I am cautious with vows. June, I thought, because if any month understands how to be new after a long grey, it's that one. She stayed 2 nights under a careful sky of machines and unjudging eyes. The 3rd morning I brought her home. My apartment tried to be gentle, rugs thicker than excuses, a low couch that had learned to hold naps without complaint, bowls that held water so quietly you could forget that the opposite of thirst is not always drink but the absence of fear. She explored like a ghost, checking to see whether walls agreed with its existence. The doorframe where other dogs had chewed was a museum of survival. The window where Sun practiced entering was a chapel. She found the darkest corner first and lay with her neck against the wall as if she couldn't entirely trust the empty air not to tighten. Healing, I have learned, is a choreography of tiny permissions. June's first meal in my kitchen wasn't a triumph. It was an argument she kept losing to old rules. Hunger taught her to eat quickly, which is fear by another name. I fed her in low portions, the way you offer story to someone who has been lied to by books. When the kettle sang, she startled into the hallway, then returned to observe the steam like a phenomenon she could categorize and file away under. Harmless. The first time a siren hummed outside, she crawled under the coffee table and treated it like a storm cellar. I lay on the floor nearby and told the ceiling about my day until her breath lost its count. When she slept, her paws ran narratives I couldn't understand, and her jaw ticked once a period. People like to think animals forget fast. It comforts them to imagine that affection can overwrite the past as cleanly as new paint covers smoke stains. But bodies remember the door you dragged them through. They remember the hand that fed and the hand that tightened. Trust is not a switch, it's a dimmer with a long arc. June learned the leash like a second neck, moving in fits, stopping at invisible fences, checking the sky for clauses. The first day we reached the patch of grass at the end of my block, she stood with the solemnity of a tourist at a grave, then sniffed a clover for a full minute, as if memorizing how softness arranges itself. A bus coughed, and she did a quick inventory of her exits before remembering that survival could be a habitual choice, and so could presence. Neighbors learned our pace. The woman in 3B, who wore grief like a sweater she forgot to take off, always waited for June to initiate. A kid on a scooter practiced being smaller in her shadow, asking if he could pet only with his eyes. June made a circle around them both and returned to sit near my knee, the soft leaning of a creature measuring how much space she is allowed to take and erring on the side of less. In the mirror, I watched my face adjust to a new grammar of patience. My anger, hot and noble and righteous that first night, cooled into something more useful, a long, slow persistence. The temperature at which steel learns what it wants to be. The call came the second week, because predators of any species dislike losing their toys. A number I didn't recognize tried to make its voice sound like authority. "That dog is mine," it said, the N elongated like old gum. "You stole her. She's fine over here." Silence can cut. I let it, and when I filled it, I used the law's name and the case number we had already acquired, those long digits that function like a bridge over bad rivers. He hung up. I stared at June, who had fallen asleep with her paw on the threshold between the hallway and the living room, as if refusing allegiance to any particular room might keep trouble from finding her. I moved her paw gently over the line and whispered nonsense, which works 9 times out of 10 if you say it like prayer. Compassion is expensive. Vet bills have their own gravity. Time rearranges itself around appointments. Work learns to be flexible or it learns to lose you. I sold a chair I pretended to like and unsubscribed from a dozen indulgences. None of that felt like sacrifice. It felt like accounting in a currency I finally believed in. June learned my routines with the solemn joy of a student who can't believe they were admitted. Watering the basil on the sill, reading the newspaper like it might have room for a miracle, slipping my shoes on slowly so the day wouldn't startle. She sat near but never on my feet, choosing proximity over possession, which is how we both preferred love. A month in, we visited the old yard again. Not because I wanted to, but because ghosts grow loyal if you don't let them see daylight. The fence had learned nothing. The plastic pool still curated leaves it hadn't chosen. The chain we had cut lay coiled where the officer had dropped it, a sleeping snake. June stopped at the gate and read the air with her whole body. I knelt, love's only reliable ritual, and touched my forehead to her temple as if to equalize pressure. For a full minute the world did not move. Wind refused the leaves, a car thought better of its engine, my pulse went quiet to make room for hers. Then she took a step, and another, and did not look back until we reached the spot where the cinderblock stake had made a small crater in the earth. Her nose told the whole story. I did not add color commentary. When she turned away, she let the past be the thing behind us, not the problem waiting to be solved. I picked up the length of chain and made of it a promise. I would not give it back to the man who had earned it. We carried it home like a relic, not to worship but to keep from circulation. Growth happened in increments too small to share as victories on any public platform. The first time June fell asleep on her side with all four legs asking the room for permission to sprawl. The day she learned that a squeak was not a scream. That toys can be killed without something inside you dying too. The afternoon she walked to the edge of the pond in the park and watched a mallard conducting an orchestra of ripples. With such concentration you would have thought Plato hid his laws there. She ignored the food scraps under the picnic table even when a wind conspirator offered them. She touched noses with a dog built like a poem. Rounded, rhythmic, and did not flinch when its tail wrote exclamation points. She let a child with a sticky hand be specific about love on her neck and decided the stickiness was simply a new texture, like rain. I had not realized the chain inside me until I felt it loosen. There is a way rescue binds the rescuer to the pain, to the narrative of righteousness, to the bright, addictive sharpness of crisis. After June, I felt the edges soften. Anger lost its sugar. Daily kindness, boring and unfashionable, became a high I could live with. I sat on the kitchen floor sometimes while the kettle tried to be opera, and I told June aloud about emails I didn't want to send, about the neighbor who watered his fake plant, about a headline that asked to be better. Her ears did a slow choreography of interest and dismissal, and when I finished, she bumped my chest with her head like a gavel that agreed enough for now. The way we lived began to resemble a poem that didn't mind being read quietly. There was a day I would have called the climax if I hadn't learned that these things are spirals, not arcs. The preliminary hearing made a room into an evaluation. Fluorescent honesty, a judge whose mouth had forgotten to soften, a man with a hat he took off for no one. The officer laid out photographs, the bowl of ice, the chain around the cinder block, the shape in the doghouse that could have been anything under that much neglect. My hands turned cold even though the room was a small oven of sweaty opinion. When they asked me to speak, I did not rehearse suffering. I talked about the way June chose to sit near the threshold that first day in my apartment, about how she left her paw there like a declaration of independence, signed hesitantly, about how her breath finally stopped counting the distance to the door. I used words the law understands, deprivation, harm, intent, but I smuggled in the language of life, sun, bowl, sleep, laugh. The judge's expression did not change, but the room felt different when we left. Out on the courthouse steps, June pressed her brow to my shin, that contract we kept renewing. Behind us, the man scowled at a cigarette he couldn't get to light and looked smaller than his hat. Months fell off the calendar like old wallpaper. June shed the last of the matted rope around her neck and grew a new ring of fur, pale and soft and, to me, holy. I did something I had avoided. I let the word adopt loose in my mouth to see if it would bite. It did not. It curled up like a good dog and slept. Paperwork pulled a chair up to our days and made itself comfortable. I signed my name more neatly than I have ever written it. The officer clapped my shoulder in a way that made me believe we weren't merely cogs with hearts strapped on. At the shelter intake desk, where we had first made a kind of triage out of hope, the clerk cried ugly and didn't apologize. June sat with the gravitas of a grandmother observing her descendants do something smart. The first morning after she was legally mine, the sun did what it always does and was applauded appropriately by plants and windows and the kettle. June placed her head on my knee while I tied my shoes and grew heavier by a degree that announced a forever. We walked farther than usual, her leash slack like a poem line that had learned enjambment, and turned down a street we didn't know. The world had practiced spring while we had been busy surviving. Tulips showed off their private vocabulary. A boy in a red jacket argued with a kite that had inherited his stubbornness and delighted in it. June stopped and stared, and something inside her loosened enough to let her tail attempt a wag it could sustain. We found a small park where the city does its best impression of rural without believing in it. A woman sat on a bench with a paperback and a grief I recognized because griefs recognize each other. June, who still rationed her bravery, walked over and sat a dignified distance away. The woman looked up, surprised into a smile. The way people are when the world offers exactly what they didn't know how to ask for. "Can I?" she began, and stopped. Words had been expensive for her recently, I could tell. June solved the economy by inching forward and letting the woman place fingers under her chin the way you can only do if you intend to mean it. The woman made a noisy inhale and then crushed out a laugh on the exhale, and I felt the universe adjust its posture to accommodate the small miracle of two beings choosing to be gentle, because the alternative had failed them both. The chain sits on my bookshelf now, a circle broken once and therefore forever. People sometimes mistake it for decor, which feels too neat a word. It's an artifact the way scars are artifacts, proof that something happened, proof that its opposite is possible. I keep it where I can see it on the hard days, when emails grow teeth and the news tries to teach me cynicism and I am tempted to be good at being tired. June will catch me looking and trot over as if to remind me that the best art is done at dog-height water bowls refilled on time, socks stolen and returned without shame, naps taken in beams of sun that named you worthy before you woke. Sometimes I take the chain down and hold its cold in my hands long enough for it to warm into belonging. The June will put her paw on it, not in anger and not in triumph, but in curiosity, as if to ask, what is this puzzle piece that doesn't fit us anymore? I tell her, out loud, because we are that kind of house, that it used to be a sentence and now it is a fragment, and we are the grammar that makes it harmless. She does not understand the joke, but she understands the tone, and that is more important. On nights when rain articulates itself against the window with the enthusiasm of old poets, June sleeps with her back against my calves as if I were the wall and she could finally trust it. The kettle keeps handing us small weather. The basil on the sill forgives me when I forget it, which I am trying not to. My anger has learned to be useful, showing up when letters need writing or phone calls need making or a neighbor needs more courage than the day gave them. It is quiet more often, and quiet is not weakness. It is focus. My love, which used to be theatrical, has learned to be specific. If you had told me that night in the yard, the chain whispering, the porch light making a theater out of my failure to move fast enough, that our days would become indistinguishable from a good life, I might have believed you, and I might have wanted to punch you for the easy optimism. Life doesn't turn neatly, it migrates. June and I have become residents of a different climate, less storm, more drizzle, less thunder, more song. We still carry umbrellas, but sometimes we forget and get wet and laugh and smell like rain and the air forgives us. The ending isn't a ceremony, it's a morning like any other. June finds her spot on the rug, where sun decides to forgive us for all the rooms we ignored the night before, and I make coffee with the seriousness of a person who has learned that rituals save more lives than speeches. The chain on the shelf throws a brief coin of light onto the wall, and then stops showing off. I sit on the floor because chairs are too far from certain truths. June comes over and chooses my shin anew, pressing her brow against it with the weight of someone signing a document with their body. Outside, a garbage truck rehearses patience. A child insists on a jacket in June. The world believes in the possibility of better. Inside, the only sentence that matters writes itself without ink: you are free. You are home. You are loved in the present continuous. I don't pretend this fixes everything beyond our door. There are other yards, other chains, other dogs counting breath into the night, while someone tells himself the story that makes neglect manageable. I answer phones with names and numbers, and I ask neighbors to be brave, and I learn the vocabulary of bylaws like another language I can use to translate pain into action. But the way I keep my courage from fraying is simpler. I watch June sleep. I watch her mouth dream of food she will never have stolen from her again. I watch her legs twitch, not in panic, but in pretend chase after a life that finally runs just fast enough to make her happy. And I remember that breaking a chain is not a single moment, but a daily practice of filling bowls, of attending to thresholds, of choosing to kneel. If the story must close, if credits must roll before the kettle sings again and the mail arrives, I want it to end where it opened, with sound. Not the chain's old whisper, not the porch light's electric hum, not even my own breath counting itself brave. I want the ending to be the small noise June makes when she settles completely, a kind of gentle exhale that tells the day it has done enough and can sit down now. That sound, folded into the quiet of a room that has learned not to be cruel, is the opposite of all we found that night. It is also the answer to a question I didn't know I'd been asking as I stepped through that broken fence: can love change the weather? Listen, it just did. Summer arrived like a soft apology, dew beading on the chain link fences, noon light turning the neighborhood's tired paint into brief bravado. June's coat had found its shine, the dullness chased out by meals she didn't have to guard and sleep she didn't have to bargain for. In the park, she had a way of stopping in front of the drinking fountain at the same time every morning, leaning her shoulder into my thigh and looking up as if to say, "We keep our rituals." Yes. I pressed the metal button and watched water arc into a shallow mouth, then tilted the separate spout for dogs. June drank with the small, satisfied sounds of a body in conversation with kindness. Children orbited, their scooters whispering along concrete, their voices inventing rules to games that had never needed them before. A woman pushing a stroller paused to ask June's name, and when I told her, she smiled like the syllable completed a thought she'd been having all day. Sun warmed the collar tag until it clicked faintly against her fur, the sound of a home wearing its keys on the inside. The shelter asked if we could speak at a Saturday event, something cheerful with bunting in hand, painted signs and a raffle for a basket full of dog biscuits shaped like bones and bad puns. I said yes because refusing joy is a habit I don't want to practice. The community center's rec room smelled like coffee and tape. June took her place on the strip of sunlight that fell fat through the high windows and settled the way saints do in paintings. One foreleg crooked, chin lifted slightly toward the light, as if receiving it as a condition rather than a gift. When I told our story, I didn't dramatize the night or seek applause from sorrow. I described the chain with the detachment of someone filing an invoice. I called attention to smaller revolutions. The first time June fell asleep with her spine exposed to the room, the day her tail, uncoached, found the idea of an easy wag, the way she learned that the kettle's scream is the sound of coming warmth. People nodded the way grain nods in wind. An older man with hands that looked like they'd forgiven a lot cleared his throat and said his yard had a length of chain too. "Leftover?" he said, shame pilling on the word like lint. "From before. Thought I'd keep it, just in case." "Think I'm done with just in case?" June walked over and stood on his shoe. He laughed, bending into the kind of gratitude that doesn't crack like porcelain. We took the chain from my bookshelf. The relic lifted carefully like an argument, "You're ready to retire," and brought it to the event in a paper grocery bag that had hauled milk on better days. Kids gathered as if I'd smuggled fireworks. I spilled the broken loop onto the table, its links tinkling like coins paying a debt. What should we do with it? I asked the room, expecting ceremony. A girl with a blue barrette and a nose sprinkled with constellations tilted her head and said, "Make it into something else." Her voice contained the blueprint of eras. A volunteer whose uncle welded art for garden weddings brought a portable torch and a steel rod. In the parking lot, sunlight turned the chain into a mirror that refused to return a cruel image. We bent the links into a circle and then straightened one side, hammered the angles gentle, welded a little tab at the edge. By late afternoon, we had fashioned a water bowl holder, the chain reborn into a ring that would grip a stainless dish at dog height, an answer to thirst installed along the fence at the park, where June liked to watch mallards make arguments only water understands. When we set the bowl in its new seat and filled it, June approached, sniffed the metal's honest chill, and drank. The crowd clapped, but softly, as if not to startle this new arrangement of mercy. A boy touched the welded seam and asked if hot metal remembers pain. "It remembers shape," I told him, "and it learns new ones." The house where June had been tethered grew quieter as the seasons turned. The porch light, once insisting on its jurisdiction, burned itself out. Grass staged a slow coup through cracks in the walk. A for sale sign arrived and learned to live with its own optimism. We walked past without sermon. June would lift her head, read the air, decide it was only air, and move on. One late afternoon, a truck backed into the yard and men in jackets the color of municipal patients loaded a roll of chain onto a flatbed, rust flaking like old beliefs. The man with the hat watched from the steps, hat in hand now, face surprised to find his own smallness. I didn't wave. Forgiveness isn't a performance, and some transformations prefer to be unstated. June paused and looked at him with the blank kindness dogs reserve for people who will not follow them home. Then she put her nose to the ground where the stake had once bullied the earth and found only the smell of rain. We rescued again. It happens the way weather happens, suddenly, predictably. A text from the shelter director in those clipped sentences that know the difference between urgency and panic. Backyard. Repeat complaints. Pup. A chain. I felt a tiredness that was not fatigue but the ache of déjà vu. June watched me pull on my boots and did the trot she does when the day uses the word go. We arrived to a smaller yard, a chain shorter, a bowl more honest about its emptiness. The pup, half shepherd, half question mark, ears undecided, barked the way hunger does when it learns volume is a form of hope. The officer read the code again, numbers steady as fence posts. I kneeled again, palms forward, voice thrown low and sweet like a rope. June stood beside me and did the most useful thing, nothing. She let the pup learn us without being asked to trust too much too fast. Dogs apprenticed to neglect need time to review the syllabus of gentleness. When the chain gave, the pup launched into the air and ricocheted off possibility, legs a mess of gratitude they hadn't learned to coordinate. June took a headbutt to the shoulder without flinching, made a circle, invited a game, then slowed it down to a pace that matched instruction to breath. In 15 minutes, the yard became a classroom. In an hour, the chain became a memory we would not keep. The officer signed her name, and I thought about the way systems can be made to protect when people inside them remember they have spines and hands. Nights returned to their glorious uneventfulness. June snored in the minor key. I organized our life around the priorities of steadier species: breakfast on time, walks long enough for the mind to finish a thought, water bowl refilled before thirst asks twice. In the grocery store, I found myself lingering at the end cap where cheap dog collars hung like bright punctuation, thinking about the throat they would circle. I bought the softest one, a color between green and forgiveness, and left it in the donation bin near the register. The cashier, a teenager turning into someone good, said, "Nice," and meant the whole world by it. A letter arrived addressed to me, care of the shelter. The return address cleverly anonymous in the way a neighbor's gratitude sometimes is. Inside, a photograph, the older man from the event, grinning next to a freshly bare fence post. Where a chain had once thrown a shadow, there was only sunlight and a patch of dirt trying on grass. In the bottom corner, written in black marker, the sentence without adornment, no more just in case. I put the photo on the fridge. June sniffed it and wagged like she understood signatures. Winter tried and failed to make an enemy of us. June learned to accept the indignity of a sweater when wind sharpened itself. She'd trot down the hall with the perseverance of small armies, nails a neat metronome. In the park, our water bowl holder hunkered under frost. Metal halo turned pale with breath, the dish a silver coin where snow tried to spend itself. Someone had draped a scarf around the chain's welded seam, a bright loop of yarn confessing to an affection for objects that refused to be what they were made for when what they were made for was harm. I brushed snow off, filled the bowl with warm water from a thermos, and watched steam lift like new language into the morning. A stranger's terrier drank, thanked no one, and trotted on, which is how Grace likes to work. Spring again, shameless and green, a riot with good manners. The basil on the sill forgave me anew. A June found a sun square and lay on her side, ribs rising in a rhythm that could be printed and taught to orchestras. A bee investigated her ear and left with an opinion. I sat on the floor with letters to answer a school inviting us for a kinder, then necessary assembly, a council member proposing a small ordinance with a large heart, a neighbor asking how to talk to a different neighbor whose backyard had begun to sound like thunder even on cloudless days. I wrote back with specifics and softness. New verbs tuned to useful pitch document. Report accompany check return bring water wait. June shifted, bumping her skull gently against my shin. The weight of her confirmation landing like a seal on a document we'd been signing for months. If there must be a moment that asks to be called a climax, perhaps it is as small as this: a boy standing at the park's chain turned bowl, holding a plastic pitcher like a flag, filling the dish until the water made a round song, then stepping back to watch a stranger's dog drink, his face carrying the expression usually reserved for miracles and first snows. His mother watched from the bench, her chin in her hand, a woman considering that her son had found a way to repair the world that did not require permission or electricity. June lay under the bench, eyes soft, tail writing punctuation marks in the dust. The boy looked at me, at June, at the bowl made from a past that had refused to end itself, and lifted the pitcher in salute. I lifted my coffee. We honored a ceremony nobody had planned. In the evenings, the apartment returned to its quiet thesis. The kettle negotiated with itself. The chain on the shelf took the last light the way water takes shape, tossing it in a bent oval against the wall before swallowing it whole. June rose from sleep with the deliberation of someone who had decided to live long and laid her head on my knee. I scratched the notch in her ear, where life had signed its name, and thought about weather patterns. How once you've changed them in 1 yard, they have a way of drifting over fences and settling elsewhere, on porches and inside kitchens, in city ordinances and in the vocabulary of children who use the word gentle like a tool. And when friends ask me, as they still sometimes do, whether I think stories like ours can really make a dent in the world's meanness, I answer without rhetoric. I tell them about the bowl in the park that stays full because a boy refills it, about the letter taped to my fridge, about the municipal truck carrying away the old roll of chain while a hat finally came off, about the terrier who took a stranger's water without needing to send a thank you note, about a girl in a blue Barrett who said make it into something else and renamed an afternoon. I tell them about June, who brings me the soft rope toy in exchange for absolutely nothing, whose brow finds my shin every morning to renew the treaty, whose sleep unspools into the sort of peace you don't need a certificate for. The night doesn't clap when we turn off the lights. The city keeps doing what cities do, but in the modest glow of the lamp, in the polite hum of the refrigerator, in the slow exhale June makes as she settles. One long, confident breath that tells the room to stand down. I hear the opposite of a chain. I hear a life choosing itself. And in that sound, ordinary as a kettle about to sing, is the full measure of what we changed, a weather report rewritten to favor gentler storms. A forecast that finally belongs to those who sleep unafraid.